to Special Investigations. Today's episode, The Nazca Mummies, hosted by Jaime Maussan.
Peru has been the cradle of some of the oldest civilizations on the planet, the majority of which buried their nobles and kings, with treasures and valuable objects to accompany them in the afterlife. That being the case, Peru became a great huaca, a cemetery of millenary civilizations that attracts more than 25,000 tomb raiders, known as huaqueros. In 2017, one of these huaqueros found a grave near Nazca that profoundly terrified him. Known as Mario, this huaquero, with more than 20 years of experience, left the place and did not return for several months. Mario eventually contacted the Enquiry Institute in Cusco, a non-profit organization run by the French-Peruvian archaeologist Thierry Jamin.
The discovery was made by a treasure hunter, and that, in Peru, is a crime. When they came to us, it was for research and analysis. What we've done is spread the word about a find and stop these pieces from disappearing. It was an opportunity and an honor in life to be able to reveal this information.
A team of scientists and journalists from different countries headed to Peru to try to determine the authenticity of this discovery of mummified bodies, whose characteristics, it was assured, were different to those of normal human beings. According to the information, preliminary analyses of the bodies were carried out, and these beings were found to be mummified and of different sizes, possibly to have existed alongside human beings in ancient times. We headed for Cusco, an ancient enigmatic city built in the Peruvian Andes, to meet with Thierry Jamin, who has been developing the scientific protocol regarding the extraordinary discovery made in the Nazca Desert.
In October 2016, they came knocking at the door of the Enquiry Institute, with an incredible story and even more incredible objects. We started to study them, and at the same time, to investigate, to understand more about this story, and determine if it was a fraud. But so far, we haven't found any flaws.
Jamin spoke to us about Mario, a pseudonym of a huaquero, a person who dedicates himself to extracting pre-Hispanic treasures which abounds in Peru.
Mario is the person dedicated to the trafficking of pre-Columbian objects. He found the site, and now, supports the Enquiry Institute in making this story known. One that seems to come straight from a movie.
In 2017, Thierry Jamin wrote to Dr. Jorge Nieto Montesinos, director of the Ministry of Culture of Peru. He asked for his opinion and participation. He never received a response.
We alerted the Minister of Culture at the beginning of January, so the Peruvian authorities knew all about the matter.
We went to the Enquiry Institute to carry out the research start. However, to our surprise, we found that there were no bodies. There was no sign of Mario, and the Enquiry Institute staff desperately tried to reach him by phone. The calls were constantly being cut off. Thierry Jamin and his partner, Jose Casafranca, tried to convince him without any luck. After several failed attempts, it was my turn to try to reason with the huaquero and persuade him that we were not there for anything other than scientific research. Finally, after several promises not to compromise with the government, he accepted and promised to send us the evidence. After a long wait, several plastic and cardboard boxes finally arrived at Enquiry, sent by Mario through intermediaries. We were shocked. We were facing what appeared to be organic tridactyl, 3 fingers hands, more than 12 inches in length, with 5 or 6 phalanges on each one of them. In addition, we could see something similar to metal implants, the purpose of which was unknown at the time. It is true that in scientific literature, there is polymorphism and other malformations which are present in some human beings, but no reference to 3-fingered beings with 5 or 6 phalanges on each of them.
Hemos podido observar
We have been able to observe that these hands have a very specific and functional anatomical structure. There are 5 metacarpals, of a length totally superior to that of the known human species. For us, the shorter of our fingers requires an opposing thumb that allows us to grasp and hold things. This tridactyl hand, because of its length and 6 phalanges, would have been able to wrap in order to take objects.
tomar las cosas.
If we take into account the strange paths that evolution have taken, we will quickly realize that they are strange and unexpected. We can never reassure ourselves that we already know everything. In the case of the so-called Nazca mummies, there is a surprising juxtaposition in iconography, like the representations on an ancient vase at an American university. You can clearly see beings depicted with 3 fingers. We could not qualify those cases as a fraud, because in the eyes of the ancient men it was a sacred form and deity. In my opinion, it is the most plausible explanation. It is an hypothesis that becomes more and more concrete.
The next finding were small heads of very strange beings. The heads clearly had non-human characteristics, very similar to those depicted for decades in illustrations and motion pictures of alleged extraterrestrials.
Aquí hay un dato importante.
Here is an important fact. We have found a vertebra in one of these heads that is identical to the vertebra all mammals have on Earth. It is called the atlas. This tells us that this skull was connected to a body structure. It is possible that it had a rotation movement that allowed the being to move its head.
Poder mover la cabeza.
However, our day was not yet over. The next box included a huge surprise. We were facing what appeared to be 2 organic beings, about 25 inches in length. They were in excellent condition and their heads were identical to those analyzed previously by the scientific team.
We came to the conclusion that these bodies are anatomical structures that fit together. They have joint correspondence and are obviously invaluable pieces. They also have bone tissue in their head, body, and all extremities. They also have joints and a spine. Anatomical characteristics very similar to an anthropomorphic structure. Within the configuration of the face we can appreciate orbital regions, at the same time a buccal region and a prominent head at an angle, from anterior to posterior. We are dealing with a specimen of the humanoid reptilian type. We don't know any hominid-type mammals that have 3 fingers. We have pentadactyls, the same as the primate groups, but here that characteristic is totally broken.
Estos dos tipos
These 2 individuals have totally different and distinct characteristics to those of the human species. They have only 1 bone in the forearms and 3 fingers. They have no carpal bones in the arms and legs. They also have an obvious inclination towards the reptilian species.
especie reptil.
A team formed by scientists, archaeologists, and journalists went to a private clinic in Cusco to make a series of X-rays on the new bodies received by the Inquiry organization. We named them Alberto and Josefina. We have been waiting for this moment all of our lives. Irrefutable evidence of the presence of alleged beings with no human characteristics. Although their form is that of a humanoid, perhaps they are not a product of evolution from planet Earth. This is a body that is physical, real, which could be analyzed and investigated by scientists from around the world.
This being does not have a similar ancestry to humans. Evidently, there are no paleontological nor biological records registered in science. We determined that it does not correspond in any way to the evolutionary process on Earth. The most surprising thing was to find a pregnant specimen. Inside a protuberance, we were able to identify 3 eggs. Therefore, it was in a gestation period.
The preliminary analyses of the bodies of Alberto and Josefina point to the fact that they may be closer related to reptiles than humans. However, we have to consider the possibility that they developed somewhere other than Earth, perhaps part of an ancient civilization that could have interacted and lived amongst humans.
In pre-Columbian America there have been reptile cult. In Mexico, we have Quetzalcoatl and we have Cuculcan. These are a series of divinities that are evidently reptilian. I am speaking only of the most evident, because even in Huitzilopochtli, you find reptilian elements. In Peru, there is also the famous Chabin Medusa, which has snakes on its head, combined with traces of a feline. In my opinion, the cult of reptiles has not been an exceptional one, but to the contrary, it is a constituent part of the religious fabric of our continent for thousands of years.
The evidence found during our investigation suggested the possibility that we were looking at a new species. Two unidentified humanoid bodies, small heads, as well as large tridactyl hands. We could only find similar depictions in ancient petroglyphs and pictographs. An amazing discovery found in an old cave in Peru. As we continued the investigation, we traveled from the Andes Mountains in Cusco to Nazca, a desertic area near the coast of Peru. We first stopped at Cahuachi, the ancient Inca capital that flourished 500 years before Christ and declined 400 years later. This city that today remains abandoned in the desert was the origin of the so-called Nazca lines. Many of the treasures dug out by grave robbers or huaqueros had markings bearing the influence of the Nazca lines.
Many objects have been found in the area, such as ceramics, textiles, trophy heads, and musical instruments. A teenage princess, 14 to 15 years old, was found with offerings, trophy heads of birds, and a golden crown. There are 36 pyramids, large, small, and staggered. The citadel is of great importance, 24 square kilometers, made of mud and adobe. Drawings are constantly found on excavations, sometimes portrayed on ceramic, with the Nazca lines always present. This is the capital of the Nazca culture.
These geoglyphs, these lines, these figures, have something very peculiar. Not only are they not repeated anywhere else in the world, but they were created using an extractive technique. This consists of removing the top layer and leaving the brighter bottom exposed, which has a shade of white. A key difference is that these figures have been made using one stroke, that is, as if we start the stroke from a point, and without lifting the pencil, make the whole design and we end at the same point where we started. The discovery of the tridactyl mummies could give an answer to the possible participation of foreign intelligence that could have had important influence and possible interaction with ancient Peruvians.
We finally arrived at Nazca, expecting to meet face-to-face with the huaquero. Mario kept canceling and changing location, allegedly for security reasons. This was frustrating, but according to experts, a common practice when dealing with grave robbers.
Mario is a clandestine treasure hunter. For 25 years, he has found thousands of ceramics throughout Peru, especially on the coast. He has helped in the discovery of many well-known sites. He's been active since the 1990s, and his most recent discovery does not belong to the cultures known in South America. What I can promise is that we will get to the bottom of this story. If it is a fraud, we will denounce it. If it is real, we will prove it. But everything indicates for now, that it is 100% real. It could very well change history as we know it. The huaquero is a nickname given to grave robbers and tomb raiders. It has been a tradition inherited from father to son for centuries. They don't care about the cultural issue, they are only driven by monetary utility. If we look at these problems dialectically, inside the bad there is always a little bit of good. If governments don't give importance to archaeological research, and there is no budget, guaqueros are all of a sudden exercising a kind of unconscious rescue. The fact is that 90% of the findings throughout Peru is the work of guaqueros. Surely many of them have found important objects in the tombs they raided, but never before something similar to the case of the Nazca mummies have arise. The Nazca pterodactyls are unique, and we have never before heard of a discovery of similar specimens.
The grave robbers summoned the group of scientists, physicians, and journalists for a surprise. The Huaquero finally chose a secret place to meet. It was near Palpa's limits. We reached the top of the roof of a house, but nobody was there to meet us. The waiting game began again. The group was tired and showing signs of frustration. Suddenly, a group of men, along with the Enquiry staff, arrived and prepared a platform. And to our surprise, Mario himself appeared with some associates, carrying a large box. The team swirled around, and Mario finally uncovered it. It was a mummy over 5 feet in height, a being with human similarities but also great differences. Maria, which is the name by which it would be known, is a mummy with hybrid characteristics. 3-dimensional hands and feet, in a perfect state of preservation, with similarities to Homo sapiens, but also with great differences.
To my mind, it is one of the greatest historical discoveries of the 21st century. Maybe the greatest. This type of discovery totally changed our presentation of history. We know that it was a lot of artifacts that was hidden from public, from all these cultures in South America. And they all tell that it was some gods who came, who had 3 fingers, who had this type of skull. Same we have in Egypt. It is written that it was gods who had this type of skull, who came from the sky.
We are obviously looking at the discovery of a new species, never before described in scientific literature. A body with an anthropomorphic structure, with an elongated head, neck, rib cage, and pelvic bones. We can also appreciate very long upper and lower extremities. We notice the absence of ear cartilage, but the presence of ear canals on the right and the left sides of the cranium. In regards to the cervical region, we can clearly find vertebrae, specifically an elongated set of spinous apophyses. It is quite clear.
The origin of this specimen is hard to determine, since it is the first real body of its kind, available to us in physical form. However, the differences with humans are remarkable and irrefutable. It is a very well-preserved mummified body, based on its current structures and attachments, its thinning on the muscle, and its current position, with its view up. I could venture to predict that it could be 2,000 or 3,000 years old.
The Huaquero allowed us to take Maria's body to a clinic. Raimundo Salas is a specialist in radiology with more than 35 years of experience.
We are scientifically proving that this body is real and that it was once alive. For example, we have the teeth from the upper arch here and the one from the lower arch over here. The skull with remains of brain mass. This part here shows the lungs at the side. This is the heart, with the bronchioles and the great vessels, lungs at both sides. And here are the 4 cavities and the bronchioles that are preserved with the shape of the respiratory system. The lines are part of the intestines and relate to the structures that form the abdomen. It is completely harmonious.
The elongated skull of Maria was similar to those discovered in other areas of Peru, where people were supposedly deformed in similar fashion, perhaps as a status and hierarchy. However, others consider it an attempt to imitate the appearance of beings with the same characteristics. Continuing with the investigation, we traveled to Paracas in the south of Peru, where we met with Brian Forster, a North American biologist who has been studying these skulls for decades. Brian Forster is convinced that these beings are not directly related to human beings, nor the original inhabitants of Paracas.
We recently found out that the largest elongated skulls in the world are found in one section of one ancient cemetery that's located about 30 minutes drive from this museum. And so this one here and the one on the other side were found in that very specific area. So these are probably either the original natural-born elongated skulls or the immediate descendants of those people. The volume is much greater than a normal human being, and so that by itself is telling you that there's a genetic difference between those specific skulls and any Native American people who have ever lived in Peru.
Years before, Brian Forster made another transcendent discovery in Patapatani, Bolivia, where he found the corpse of a young mother with an elongated skull and a small fetus that died before being born and had the same characteristics. A discovery that could demonstrate these beings were born with this feature and were not necessarily artificially modified. A discovery that opened the possibility that a different class of beings that had coexisted with human beings and perhaps were considered divine beings or true gods on Earth. While we were in Paracas, a new discovery was made in the Nazca tomb, the body of a similar being called Wawita, which means baby in the Quechua language, with only 3 fingers and toes. Next to Wawita, a headless body similar to Alberto and Josefina was discovered in the same tomb. Its discoverers gave it the name Victoria. In addition, several other complete bodies in perfect condition were unearthed, with the same reptilian characteristics, which will be known as the family. The investigation of the Nazca mummies has yielded, so far, the discovery of 3 tridactyl hands, 2 heads, and 2 complete bodies with reptilian characteristics, named Albert and Josefina, a possible hybrid mummy named Maria. And the most recent discovery includes another body of reptilian characteristics named Victoria, the body of a similar being called Wawita, and 3 complete and intact bodies called the family. We have these 3 individuals. Probably they are part of the same family, probably, covered in fine white powder, identified as cadmium chloride and diatomaceous earth, a microscopic fossilized algae used to desiccate all of the bodies found in the cave. But where was this tomb? The team wondered if they were ever going to see this mysterious cave, and how many bodies actually exist. Mario finally agreed to take some members of the team to visit the cave. They departed from Palpa and entered an area of arid mountains. After a few miles, they descended Mario's old car and started a long hike along a rocky pad. An hour later, they arrived at the tomb. The entrance was covered by stones which helped it go unnoticed, except to Mario's expert eyes. After visiting the cave, it was clear that the inside was completely covered by diatomaceous earth.
In those mountains, there are no grass, no vegetation, nothing alive. When we came to the cave itself, it's not so big, but it's not like a cave which been used by ancient people, where they can make fire, they sit together. No, it's just a little cave. All this cave was covered with this dust. It was not only on the floor, but all around, so it was, again, clear that it's natural material. First of all, I don't believe in anything Mario tells. It is clear for me, that the cave we were taken, it's not the only cave.
Ingresa una persona a la vez.
One person enters at a time, but once inside the capacity expands. However, the place had a very characteristic smell, similar to those we have experienced with the mummified bodies. We then proceeded to document the finding. This part is rock, and when scratching the surface, it crumbles. In the back there is another room, even smaller. They are small rooms that have been dug in the ground to deposit these mummified bodies. I also got inside another section to try to measure if it could fit a body like Maria's, which was relatively easy. I think that it also gives science justice, and in my opinion, it will provide the elements so that scientists could continue the investigations. Which is what everybody wants. To arrive to the truth. Whatever that may be.
But it was time to hear from Leandro Benedicto Rivera, better known as Mario. The Huaquero is the first to acknowledge that he is very interested in finding out the origin of the strange bodies he found by chance.
My life changed radically since the discovery came to light. It caused all sorts of problems for me, my family, my social life, my job. Everything this happened to me very casually while looking for gold veins. I bumped into a pinch of stones, which I thought was an abandoned mine. I started digging and found something that looked similar to that of a dry animal. It was buried and covered in white dust. I thought it was rare finding, but since it was covered with this dust, I didn't know what it was. Later, I began to dig out more and more objects. Some hands that I first thought belonged to a large bird, and later, strange heads with eyes and mouths. In total, there were about 9 bodies. I am surprised that all the evidence is pointing to this finding being real. I'm very interested in having experts examine them. I'd like to find out what they are.
The team collected samples of the unidentified bodies for testing in laboratories across the globe. The X-rays and tomographies unveiled results that were beyond our expectations. Professor Korotkov submitted the samples to the head of image analysis at a medical institute in Russia.
We reviewed a CAT scan of a mature individual, a mummy referred to as Maria. It is the skeleton of a person with an anomaly. It is 3-fingered. If we consider the traditional motion that the mummification process involves the removal of internal organs, technically this is not a mummy. But if we consider that the body was mummified naturally, meaning the organs were simply not removed, this is a skeleton that is very well preserved, and we were able to see many details in the CAT scan. All the structures and bones in the main body are visible in the analyzed tomographies. In the scans of the back of the skull, we saw structures that are less dense. That bone structures, and most likely, are the hydrated remnants of the brain.
In Denver, a radiologist reviewed the images, a highly respected expert in her field at the University of Colorado Hospital. Her insight, based on years of experience, was invaluable in assessing the possibility of forgery.
Looking at this skeleton, obviously we have a fairly humanoid-looking bone. We've got the eyes that are facing forward. In the hand, coming from the carpus, not only do we see 3, and only 3, fingers, but you have enlargement of the bones as well. So we're seeing the same thing happening in the feet. They're very thick bones. They're much thicker than bones that you would find in my hand or in your hand. The skull, I don't see any suture lines. There's no bones that are separate in the skull. They all appear fused. So this appears to be a solid structure.
If the review of the CAT scans and X-rays proves it is indeed an organic body without alterations, this leads us to the intriguing question: could this be evidence of a new species, never before discovered on Earth? The team eagerly awaited the dating and the DNA sequencing results, knowing they will provide crucial insights into the nature of the bodies. The tests at different laboratories around the world started to trickle in. The results of carbon-14 dating at a university in Mexico City dated the body named Maria as 1,750 years old. Another laboratory in the state of Florida confirmed the results, dating Maria as 1,700 years old, and the smaller body Victoria as 1,200 years old. Professor Korotkov took some of the samples for DNA testing at the University of St. Petersburg with surprising results.
The sequencing process itself is run in a device called the genome sequencer. In our case, we use two sequencers, one for the primary analysis and a second machine for a comprehensive analysis of the genomic DNA. A great amount of data is generated after sequencing. A bioinformatician uses them to analyze the data. He found out that there are ancient samples. In other words, it tells us that we have unique and never-before-seen data.
So far, we have managed to obtain approximately 700,000 different sequences in this massive process, which is a state-of-the-art procedure. In order to obtain this information, the machine managed to make an alignment and to compare it with the human genome. The sequences, when we compared with human genome from around the globe, shows no significant similarity. In other words, we're talking about a DNA that's practically unknown. We also compared the samples with the genomes of primates and reptiles, such as sea turtle and crocodile. But the results we have obtained so far show that there is no similarity to any of the living beings that inhabit our planet.
Of the DNA that was isolated, only 25% of the total matched any known human gene. So that means that 75% of this DNA is not matching any known human reference sequence. And so you take these sequences isolated from the sample with this being, and you go and you compare them to that human reference genome data, and only 25% match up. 75% don't.
All of the laboratories involved in the testing agreed on a specific result. The DNA does not coincide with any human being or living organisms. Comparisons were facilitated with microorganisms, bacteria, and animals. The conclusions were that the specimens were of unknown species of living beings. As the international news outlets reported on this amazing story, the Ministry of Culture's official position was that the bodies had been created with animal parts. Armed with the evidence and expert analysis gathered, we arrived in Lima, hoping to meet the Minister of Culture, to whom we had already written, proposing to continue the investigation together to determine the validity of the evidence. However, upon our arrival, we found a hostile environment. The minister, we were told, was not present, and his associates were busy. After a long wait, we were met by a representative who asked us to send a new letter by email so we could speak with a specialist. Very disappointed. We expected to speak to the Minister of Culture here in Peru. They don't have any interest in cooperating and doing any kind of investigation around this case, and it is unfortunate to find the truth, not just here in Peru, but around the world. After the failure in Lima, we returned to Cusco because we heard from a Peruvian legislator interested in talking to us. It was Congressman Armando Villanueva, who had heard about the finding and promised to make a presentation to the Peruvian Congress. Finally, on the morning of November 19th, 2018, scientists who had participated in the study of the Peruvian mummies from different countries were invited. Every scientist had 15 minutes to present their data. Several groups presented tomography analysis, describing their anatomical structure. Other groups presented results from DNA studies. All of these groups worked independently. The main objective was to attract the attention of the Peruvian scientific community. But despite the evidence presented, no official representative supported a continuation of the investigation. After the scientific presentations, a Peruvian archaeologist was given the floor. He stated that all the data presented was unacceptable. He didn't even want to consider the results or ratify any of the findings from the international panel present at the time. He reiterated the Ministry of Culture wanted nothing to do with the find from the beginning. After the failed presentation in Congress, the media requests increased, especially after a press conference that generated coverage from around the world. The Peruvian government was forced to provide an explanation via a representative of the Ministry of Culture in the city of Cusco. Even though she went on record, their official posture never changed.
The Ministry of Culture has an area that investigates archaeological material. We understand the processes of mummification. We can understand the place where it has been and where the material comes from. We investigate the archaeological context where the material comes from. As pre-Hispanic material which belongs to a culture that has developed in Peru, of course it is in the interest of the Ministry of Culture to understand it, to study it and recover it. Still, it is not the interest of the Ministry of Culture. And I say this because I work there, and from a personal perspective, it is not in our interest to know if it is an extraterrestrial mummy or not, because that is out of what we believe.
Since 2016, when the first Nazca body was discovered, the Ministry of Culture has turned down all requests from the international team studying the case. Instead, members of the ministry presented to the media small grisly dolls seized by customs, which according to their experts were assembled with animal bones using synthetic glues. Perhaps the crisis within the government of Peru could have been a reason. 7 Peruvian presidents have taken oath since 2016, and 20 ministers of culture have been at the helm. None granted permission for the bodies to be transported out of Peru. They remained on loan at the San Luis Gonzaga University in Ica, and several forensic medical examiners from the United States who inspected the mummies are now also pleading with the government of Peru to authorize the body's shipment to America for study in the U.S. labs, including forensic expert Dr. John McDowell, retired professor at the University of Colorado, who has inspected the bodies firsthand.
The considerations that we have going on right now, Dr. Caruso and Dr. Rodriguez and I spent about 7 hours examining these entities, bodies, tridactyl bodies. And from what we found, we believe that there is enough information that we were able to view and collect that further investigations are necessary to determine exactly what these are.
Dr. McDowell was joined on this Unica trip by Dr. William Rodriguez, a forensic anthropologist with the Maryland State Medical Examiner, and Dr. James Caruso, a U.S. Navy veteran who is now the City of Denver's Chief Medical Examiner.
Again, at the press conference, we talked about that. It needs to be peer-reviewed and have other people take a look, who can look at the dental patterns and the facial structures of these entities. That's why, in my opinion, the people of Peru should have the opportunity to find out what this is.
A direct confrontation with the government of Peru continued through 2024. During the press conference, showcasing the discovery of the panel, put together by Dr. McDowell, members of the Ministry of Culture, accompanied by armed guards, erupted the event. They planned to confiscate the mummies. The ordeal convinced Dr. McDowell to pen an open letter to Peruvian officials in La Noticia, Peru, where he requested that those in authority ensure a comprehensive and meticulous evaluation of all of these recovered entities. The case continued to deepen with the discovery of more tridactyl creatures by huaqueros. These unique specimens have been given new names. There's Santiago, found in January 2024, a small body considered to be 4 to 6 years old, with a large head and obliquous eyes. The most recent tomographies highlight the cranium and very strange fingerprints, which are vertical instead of horizontal. A special camera was implemented to capture visuals of its nasal cavities and teeth. The second body was named Sebastian. It is estimated to have been between 12 to 14 years old. Preliminary studies detected that its eyes had been sewn together using fibers that resemble that of synthetic nylon. The tomographies revealed an implant across the back of its neck, and like the previous body, it also had fingerprints were also vertical. There is also Montserrat, a female, between 16 and 20 years old. The images revealed a gold implant. It is located on her forehead, and according to the scientist, it has been partially covered by her own skin. An interesting discovery showed that Montserrat was gestating. The scans show a fully grown fetus, which died inside her. We call this unborn creature Raphael. Tests have not yet determined if Raphael was tridactyl, but the images show very long fingers. Doctors have suggested that she might have died of complications with her pregnancy, since the fetus had not yet flipped. A tragic and poignant detail that adds a human element to this ancient mystery. In Washington, U.S. Congressman Tim Burchett of Tennessee introduced a new Transparency Act that would require declassification of all federal documents related to unidentified aerial phenomena. He is also interested in helping bring to light the mystery of bodies found in Nazca.
And I would be interested in getting some people to analyze those bodies, or I would help you find somebody to analyze it. I would like to bring in some people from the scientific community. To think that we are the best that God can do, are we it? And when I go out every night, I always look up at the stars. I mean, that's the vastness of God's great universe. We are a speck in a million beaches. Could He not create more? And I think He has. And I don't understand the technology behind some things that I've seen. How about if I leave it at that? And I have the utmost respect for our military fighting men and women. It has nothing to do with them. It's some guy sitting behind a desk. I'm 100% convinced they're hiding something. I've talked to too many military personnel that tell me what they're hiding, and they've told me where they're hiding some of this stuff.
The Nazca investigation took an unexpected twist when Mexican Congress invited us to participate on 2 separate occasions. Scientists and researchers were able to present their evidence, and the live presentation of Albert and Josefina created worldwide coverage.
I want to talk about a cosmic discovery that we've been dealing with congressional hearings here and in Mexico, that we have an unexplained phenomenon happening on Earth that should be investigated by the government.
So it's got a head, shoulders, arms, legs, hips. That's humanoid. Give it to the labs and let other people investigate it. That's a start. I love it.
Well, let's talk about
me some aliens. Don't get me wrong.
I would love it to be true.
Proving that the mummies are not a fabricated hoax will require safe passage for the Peruvian government, as well as maintaining a strict chain of custody throughout the process. Dr. John McDowell has agreed to supervise the process and to accompany the specimens, making sure that, at every step, the evidence will be secure and under his direct supervision and control. Any deeper analysis of the mummies would have to be conducted in compliance with all international laws related to archaeological finds, and broad cross-discipline work done by a diverse array of scientists will be needed to solve the Nazca mummies mystery.